All right, guys, welcome. Good evening. Welcome to another SSI India Masterclass webinar. Our talk today is by Kartik Shanker, and he is going to be talking about some of our favorite creatures, sea turtles. Now, few animals can evoke the kind of wonder inspired by these creatures. They're ancient and they have a mystical quality deriving from long lifespans and an uncanny ability to navigate huge expanses of water to return to their natal beaches. Um, while we wait for the last few people to join the meeting, let's go through some basic guidelines. All attendees will be in listen and view mode only to make sure that there aren't any unnecessary disturbances that may distract our presenter. If you experience any technical difficulties, please use the chat window and one of us on the panel will try our best to solve your problem. For questions related to the subject matter, please use the Q&A window. If you have a question that is similar to one that has already been posted, you can just click the like button to upvote it, and that way it will get more priority and be answered quicker. Finally, a feedback link will be shared at the end of the webinar. So please take the time to let us know what your thoughts of today's session were before you go. Just a gentle reminder that all these topics that we have been covering over the last few months are actually based on SSI specialty courses. If you are interested in getting certified for any of them, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us. A link will be posted in the chat window about now for those of you that are interested in signing up. Without any more delay, let me introduce you to our speaker today, Kartik Shanker. After first being introduced to reptiles at the Madras Crocodile Bank, Kartik has been involved with sea turtle conservation for 30 years now. He originally wanted to become a doctor, but thankfully for the turtles of our subcontinent, he didn't get in to medical college and instead studied zoology at the famous MCC college in Chennai. His college seniors who were monitoring and protecting turtle nests with the help of the forest department took him one day along on one of their projects, and this is where he was introduced to the olive ridley turtle. When they learned that the forest department was shutting down those hatcheries, they decided to take over, and this is actually how Kartik's turtle conservation journey began. Since then, he has worked in Orissa, Great Nicobar, Little Andamans, and various other locations around the country, and has been part of a long-term monitoring project on olive ridley and leatherback turtles. After 15 years of research and monitoring, we were very happy to hear Kartik say that the numbers of both species are stable or actually may even be increasing at these locations. Kartik is now an associate professor with the Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore, where he mentors students studying frogs, snakes, birds, plants, and marine fauna. And he is also one of the founding trustees of Dakshin Foundation. So we're very honored to have someone like Kartik present for us, and I'm not going to take any more of your time. Kartik, over to you.
Thank you, Rahul, and hi everyone. Let me get the screen share going. Great. Is that visible, Rahul?
Yes, visible.
Yes, it is.
Excellent. So I'm going to be talking today about sea turtle biology and conservation, and I like to think of it as the story of an animal that was predominantly known worldwide, perhaps for the last in recorded history, but probably for thousands of years as meat and soup, and in the last half century or so has sort of become the superstars of the animal world. I kind of traced that history of its journey from soup to superstar, but with a focus on India. So let's get started on that. Yeah. My first story over here is about tracking the leatherback. The leatherback is the largest turtle in the world, and some would say the ugliest, others would say the most beautiful. And to give you a sense of its size, it grows to about 6 feet in length and can often weigh 600 to 800 kilograms. But before we track the leatherback, we have to track the person I call the Turtle Man. Janaki Lennon and Rom Whittaker, in an article about him, wrote, he doesn't like to crawl into a sleeping bag on cold nights. Instead, he wears all his clothes. Sometimes he buries himself, except his face, which is covered by a mosquito net, in the sand to get away from rats, mosquitoes, and sandflies. He usually sleeps out of sight after playing a few riffs on his harmonica. Who was this guy? Satish Bhaskar was a student of engineering at the Indian Institute of Technology in Chennai in the 1970s, and was best known to his classmates who I met, many of whom I met decades later, for bunking class. Getting up in the morning, he'd run out to Elliott's Beach, swim for a few hours, run back, and that was pretty much his engagement with engineering. Now, right next to IIT in the early 70s, Rom Whittaker set up the Madras Snake Park. And he'd also started these turtle walks along the Madras coast. Now, many people that got involved in herpetology and snakes and turtles over the years got into this in a particular way. Like Satish, they were often bunking school or college. They would wander around and they would be hanging around Snake Park because they were really fascinated with these snakes, or turtles that they had over there. And Rom would pass by them a few times, and he'd see them coming one day and the next and the third, and then he would turn to them and say, "Hey man, do you want to clean out a snake pit?" And it's quite remarkable the number of herpetologists and conservationists who, when I was doing research for a book, told me how their lives in the field started with this one question that Rom had for them. So they did end up cleaning snake pits and going on to careers as researchers, photographers, conservationists, and so on. In Satish's case, Rom suggested that he take on the world of sea turtles. There was nobody working on sea turtles in India. And Satish started out with a survey of the Gulf of Mannar. And in 1979, they decided to do a survey of Suheli Island in the Lakshadweep. Suheli was uninhabited then and is uninhabited now, and is a 6-hour boat ride from the nearest island, which is Kavaratti, the capital of Lakshadweep. And the thing was that this island had to be surveyed during the monsoon season, May, June, and July, because that is when green turtles nested over there. Unfortunately, no one visited the islands during this period. So Satish had and Rom and others made this sort of daring plan that he would be dropped off there by fishermen in May and picked up in September, a gap of about 4 months where he would have no contact with civilization at all. And they did execute this daring plan of theirs. They took food, they took supplies, they took everything. And it isn't true that he had no contact, because Satish went out, swam out to the reef every day and threw a little bottle with a letter in it until he says he ran out of little 10 rupee notes to put in the bottle. And one of those bottles actually found its way to Sri Lanka, and a fisherman took the letter out of the bottle and posted it to his wife. So actually, in a gap of about 24 days, Satish's letter reached his wife, which even by today's standards is of post is pretty decent. That island, which we surveyed in 2015, almost 40 years after 36 years after Satish was there, was almost as remote as it was in the late 70s. It took us 6 hours, 2 fishing boats. We planned a trip for a month and spent a few days diving there and surveying the reefs and the beaches. And it struck us how remarkable it was for Satish to have done that in 1979. But Satish didn't stop there. The same year, he visited the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, and as Rom says, like many of us, including me, got completely hooked. Over the next few years, he surveyed most of the islands. And one of his most remarkable reports is his 1979 report, where he says, in the interest of brevity, it will be better to list the areas and islands not surveyed. And we're talking about a group of islands that has like, hundreds of little tiny little islands and beaches. Satish had a number of really remarkable experiences while he was on the islands. The one time he was in Interview Island serving hawksbill turtles, and he swam to Interview Island to collect supplies, and got chased by an elephant and had to throw his shirt. The elephant ripped the shirt apart. Of course, Satish, being the considerate husband that he was, he posted the pieces back to his wife Brenda with a reassuring note. Another time in the Little Andamans, he found a camp set up by the Onges, and there was a green turtle that had been freshly roasted over a fire. Satish was really hungry. He'd been eating nothing but biscuits, and so he went ahead and helped himself to that meal. And then he left 2 biscuit packets for the Onges, which to salve his conscience, he says, but I kind of suspect that if I would, that if somebody ate my turtle meat and left me biscuits, it would be more likely to throw a spear at them. That's Satish back in the 70s with Satish, and this is the first from the right or the left, whichever way you're looking, and Rom sitting next to him, and some of their field assistants. Satish was one of the first people also to survey beaches in Indonesia, in particular in West Papua. And he worked at these really remote beaches in Jamusma Bedi and Worbon. And this was so remote back in the 80s that he would actually have to swim out to a passing longboat and hand his letters to someone on board. Again, there was only a boat every 20 or 30 days. When I visited with some other sea turtle researchers in the 2000s, it was still 6 hours by boat. There were no roads to the location. And once the boat dropped us off, there was no way for us to get back except to wait for the boat to pick us up. Now, the remarkable story there is that he was one of the first outsiders to visit some of these beaches. The communities there had never met someone from the outside world. In 1985, he tagged 700 turtles and counted nearly 14,000 nests. And then the turtle numbers kind of went down over the years. The funny thing was that when other researchers visited 15, 20 years later, they discovered that Satish, they had made Satish their scapegoat, and claimed that his tagging program had either scared the turtles away. But the other story that they had was that he had put these metal tags on them and gone back to his home country and used this giant magnet to attract all of the turtles back to his own beaches. So to conclude the tale of our turtle man, we did a map a few years ago of the migrations of Satish Bhaskar, and you can see from this that he visited pretty much every beach in India and beaches elsewhere as well. More than 20 years later, when I was part of a program that surveyed beaches throughout India and all of our island groups, and we had, I think, 10 different organizations, 20 different researchers. Most of the beaches that they visited had only been surveyed once before, and that was by Satish. So in a sense, that gives us a picture of the legacy that he left for turtle biology and conservation in the country. Satish's legacy passed to the Madras Crocodile Bank, and through the Madras Crocodile Bank. Harry Andrews initiated a long-term monitoring program in Great Nicobar Island in 2000. As a part of the Wildlife Institute of India, I started my postdoctoral research first in Orissa and then in Galathea in 2001-2002, and spent an entire season there. We used to get about 300 to 400 leatherbacks nesting each night. A really remarkable location and a fabulous beach, which was sadly destroyed along with many other beaches and islands. Many lives were lost during the December 2004 tsunami. Now, that was a great tragedy, but it has some incredible stories associated with it as well. At our camp in Galathea, where we lived for multiple seasons, our main field assistant was a Karen from the community in the Middle Andamans, Agu, and Agu was at the camp with one of our researchers, Ambika Tripathi, who sadly died when the large wave struck. And the story, of course, is that there were the tide receded, and people didn't realize immediately that there would be a large wave that followed. When the 10-meter wave hit, everybody at the camp, including the assistants and some bird watchers from Pune and Ambika, were all killed. The reason we know the story is because Agu amazingly survived. He held on to a branch. He doesn't remember how long he was underwater, but when he came to the surface, he had been swept out into the bay, had broken several ribs and his collarbones, couldn't swim, and was spent 9 days hanging on to that log. Eventually, I think on day 11 or day 12, he found that a monitor lizard had climbed on the log when it was starting to eat him alive. At which point he decided that he had to make some sort of effort to swim back to the mainland, and swam from log to log, with all of his broken bones, and actually made it back to land, and was then found some other survivors who fed him, and then he was rescued 15 or 16 days after the tsunami. A really remarkable story. And Agu continues to work with us. Less than 3 years later, about 2 years later, we were back in the field. We had decided not to set up camp again at Great Nicobar because the logistics was just too difficult. And we started our long-term monitoring program in Little Andaman Island. One of the veterans of research in the Andamans, Uncle Pao, who's now in his 90s, and who actually was one of the first boatmen and one of the first field assistants that took Satish Bhaskar out. Uncle Pao and Agu and Manish Chandy and I went out and surveyed the beaches in Little Andamans. This was Uncle Pao's last trip to the field, so it was rather quite poignant for us to be on that trip with him. And of course, we had a few adventures on the trip. Our boat nearly overturned. We got stranded on one of the beaches and had to walk for 12 or 13 hours to the next creek where we could get back onto the boat. Now, all of that led to us setting up this camp, which is led by Adit Swaminathan, the guy in the beard in the middle, and a bunch, Tesoro to his right, Agu's brother, who's been the mainstay of our camp for the last 10, 12 years. And what these guys have been doing is monitoring the beaches year after year for leatherback turtles. That's kind of a very fancy 5-star accommodation. And one of the cool projects that we do is we track the leatherback. We put these satellite transmitters on them, and that send back locations, and we get to see where they go. For many years, people believed that leatherbacks in the Andamans all migrated towards Australia to feed. And the first 7 or 8 that we tracked certainly went in that direction, and that's what we thought they all did. But the last 2 that we tagged, just when we thought we were beginning to understand what they did, the last 2 decided to go in exactly the opposite direction. One went to the coast of Mozambique and the other to the coast of Madagascar. So as far as leatherbacks are concerned, the Indian Ocean is their little swimming pool. So let me come back a little bit to the basics. As I said at the outset, and as Rahul said, people have been fascinated with sea turtles for not just years or decades, but actually for centuries. In fact, the first sea turtle conservation act of some sort was passed in the Bermuda Assembly in 1620. And of course, they're referred to as so excellent a fish, which is also the title of a wonderful book on sea turtles by Archie Carr, who's sort of considered the father of sea turtle biology and conservation. If you can get your hands on that book, I would definitely recommend reading that. To give you a broad overview of sea turtles and sea turtle biology, sea turtles belong to 2 families. The leatherback belongs to a family of its own. It's got the soft shell. It's a very, very distant evolutionary relative of the hard-shelled sea turtles, which comprise the other 6 species. The green turtle, the loggerhead, the hawksbill, and the olive ridley are found all over the world, and along with the leatherback. And so there are 5 species that are globally distributed. And the Australian flatback, no prizes for guessing, is found only in Australia. And the Kemp's ridley, which I'll talk about a bit more in a minute, is found only on the east coast of Mexico. From the time that biologists have studied them, or naturalists, even going back to the 18th, 17th, and 18th centuries, sea turtles have fascinated us. It's been known for over 150 years that leatherbacks and loggerhead turtles have these very long breeding migrations. In fact, loggerheads that juveniles off the coast of California are known to swim all the way to across the Pacific, which is 15,000 kilometers, to nest on the coast of Japan. The green turtle is known to migrate to the Ascension Island in the middle of the Atlantic, and many other such migrations are known. Leatherbacks, for example, off the coast of Papua, which I talked about a few minutes ago, the ones from West Papua migrate north across the Pacific and go to the coast of California. The ones just a few hundred kilometers to the east from Papua New Guinea migrate south and end up off the coast of Chile. Green and loggerhead turtles are known to hybridize, and these are species that are evolutionarily separated by 50 million years. Leatherback turtles are amongst the deepest diving vertebrates, along, I think, with sperm whales and elephant seals, can go down to depths of below 1,000 meters. And as folks interested in, as divers or people interested in diving, that's pretty awesome. Ridleys have these enormous mass nesting aggregates, and I'm going to show you some pictures later. Rahul mentioned natal homing in turtles. They come back to the beaches where they were born. And there are even stories of loggerhead turtles hibernating underwater. And one of the tragedies of species or populations going extinct is, as much as the disappearance of a species itself, sometimes you also lose phenomena. The population that was believed to hibernate underwater actually declined so badly that we don't actually know whether this happened or not. Just as a quick overview of the species themselves, I already talked about the leatherback and its size and its remarkable migrations. The hawksbill turtle, the leatherback is largely a pelagic species, which means that it spends most of its life out in the open ocean. So much so that from the time it leaves the shore as a little hatchling till it comes back as an adult, very few people actually even see it. Even if you ask a turtle biologist who studied turtle for years, can you imagine a medium-sized leatherback in your head? They'll stop and pause, because most biologists have never seen a juvenile leatherback. Hawksbills, on the other hand, are found predominantly near reefs. They're amongst the only species that are spongivorous, which is they eat sponges which have silicon bases, and so it's been equated to eating glass. It's a pretty remarkable diet, but it also causes accumulation of certain compounds in their body, and so there's been many cases reported of hawksbill meat being poisonous and so on. The green turtle is the hero of the soup story. Green turtles have been consumed as soup for thousands and thousands, as meat for thousands and thousands of years, and really became famous across the world, for turtle soup. They were found in the millions, and then numbers decreased dramatically by the mid 20th century, and were long listed as endangered and even as critically endangered in the IUCN. But the numbers have also increased in many sites, to the point where they're no longer considered endangered at most locations, including in the Indian Ocean, parts of the Indian Ocean. And of course, our favorite hero in India, the olive ridley, the smallest species, grows to about 70 centimeters in length, rarely weighs over 50 or 60 kilograms, but is known for these absolutely spectacular mass nesting events called the arribada. The other remarkable thing about all sea turtles is that they have very similar life cycles. There are many things about them that are different, but there are a large number of their life history features that are remarkably similar. And even though leatherbacks and the hard-shelled turtles belong to different families, most aspects of their biology are almost identical. In fact, Archie Carr once famously said that a sea turtle's nesting behavior is so stereotypic, it always follows the same sort of like steps. He said, I define a sea turtle as a turtle that never puts the same flipper into its nest hole twice. So even when a flipper is amputated, by a shark bite or whatever, you see that the movement with the ghost flipper. Whereas, he said freshwater turtles aren't fussy at all. Some, they will, use their flippers quite randomly in building their nest holes. A turtle's life is composed of if you start with the adult, they have these large-scale breeding migrations, as I mentioned, which can range from a few hundred to a few thousand to tens of thousands of kilometers. I'm just going to pause for a minute over here. The name of that book, Nora, was So Excellent a Fish by Archie Carr. They arrive at these breeding grounds and they mate in offshore waters. So as an example, olive ridleys off the coast of India will arrive off the coast of Orissa, off the coast of the Bay of Bengal, in the Bay of Bengal will arrive off the coast of Orissa or elsewhere on the coast of India. A couple of months before the nesting season starts, and mating occurs in offshore waters. And then they start nesting at night, predominantly at night on sandy beaches. They come ashore. It takes about an olive ridley about an hour or so to nest. It will take a leatherback 3 or 4 hours to nest. They dig these huge holes. They dig a pit, and then they dig a hole that's about 2 feet deep in the case of the olive ridley, about 3 feet deep in the case of the leatherback. Lay about 100 to 150 eggs in these nests and cover them up. And then the olive ridley does this little thumping dance. It wiggles from side to side and thumps the nest down. Leatherbacks will spend up to 2 hours throwing sand all over in all directions to fool predators. And then they go back into the sea. Now, for researchers who are, in order to not disturb the turtles, we wait for that little window when they're actually laying the eggs, which is about 10 to 15 minutes, to either measure them or tag them, collect blood samples, attach satellite transmitters. So all of that's got to be done in that 10 minutes. When they're laying eggs, they're in a trance. You can pretty much do anything to them and they will not get disturbed. I've seen jackals and dogs actually feeding on a live turtle while she's laying eggs, and they will just sit there and continue to drop the eggs till they're done. So we wait for that window to poke around with them a little bit. And sometimes it can be really frustrating because leatherbacks will dig this nest for 45 minutes and then they'll decide, okay, I don't like this spot, and then they'll move to another place. And so then you've got to follow them, and wait for another hour while they make another attempt. And sometimes it's like 3 or 4 hours. And in places like Papua, it's raining, and you're sort of sitting there and saying, just lay your damn eggs, will you? But eventually they do. And once they've covered it up, there is no parental care. Hatchlings incubate for 7 to 8 weeks. Again, that varies from species to species. And sex determination is by the temperature of incubation. Now, this is fairly remarkable, as I'm sure you all know. Most sex determination throughout the animal world is by chromosomes. So in humans, for example, depends on whether you have 2 X chromosomes or an X, or if you're less fortunate, have an X and a Y chromosome, and worse still, have male pattern baldness. Now, if you're a turtle, a sea turtle in particular, chromosomes don't matter. What matters is the temperature at which you're incubated. Lower temperatures produce males, higher temperatures produce females, which is also seen in other reptiles. In crocodiles, for example, you see the same pattern, but the production of males and females is reversed. Higher temperatures produce males and lower temperatures produce females. And similarly in freshwater turtles as well. Now, this, as you can imagine, already has some implications. With climate change and rising temperatures, one of the things that we're concerned about is feminization of hatchling production in nesting beaches around the world. Now, turtles themselves do not necessarily, there's what is called a pivotal temperature, and which is about 29 to 30 degrees, where about 50-50 males and females are produced. But typically, sea turtle clutches do not produce 50% males and females. What they do is when they nest over the course of a season, the colder part of the season produces males, the warmer part produces females. In some places, they've been known to nest on white and dark sand beaches, and the whiter sand beaches are cooler, and so they produce males, and the dark sand beaches produce females, and so on. So they've evolutionarily found a number of ways to produce the sex that they wanted to. Now, after 7 to 8 weeks, hatchlings emerge. Now, they find the sea using a light cue, which is that they follow the brighter horizon, which is the reflection of moon and starlight on the water. And usually in natural beaches, there's a background of vegetation or trees or sand dunes, and so the seaside is the brighter side. Once they're out at sea, they swim, find the open ocean, and then they navigate using the Earth's magnetic field to which they're imprinted, and they may take 10 to 15 years to mature in the case of some turtles, and in the case of herbivorous green turtles, 30 or more years to mature even. So as I've already spoke about this, the production of hatchlings and of the other aspects of their biology, such as lighting, is likely to play a role in some of the threats that affect them. So since light is such a major cue, lights around the world have become a major threat to sea turtle hatchlings. Now, one of the cool things about the hatchling orientation and navigation is the magnetic field. Studies have shown that they're able to detect both the magnetic field intensity as well as the magnetic inclination angle, which sort of gives them something like a lat long, which allows them to navigate to their breeding grounds and then back to their feeding grounds. Now, one of these breeding grounds is on the coast of Orissa. Orissa has two major mass nesting beaches, Gahirmata and Rishikulia. And these have been known for some years now. In fact, Alexander Hamilton, let me pause over there and answer that question. I didn't talk about the males at all, did I? The question was whether males can also come out from the sea onto the beach, and they don't. Except in a few cases, there's been some very rare records of male turtles coming ashore to bask. And I think there's one classic picture of a male turtle with an elephant seal in Hawaii. But other than that, male turtles live out at sea their entire life. I'll take the rest of the questions at the end of the talk. Hamilton, a ship's captain, had written about these prodigious numbers of sea tortoises in Balasore, which is very close to Gahirmata today, back in 1727. And even though locals used the eggs, the beach was discovered by scientists in the 70s. Two very, very well-known Indian herpetologists had written about it the year before. Casually, they'd heard about this nesting beach, but they didn't have confirmation. Robert Bustard, who was this very flamboyant crocodile and turtle biologist, Scottish turtle biologist, who had worked in Australia for many years, started a long-term monitoring program in Queensland, which continues till today and is one of the longest-running programs in the world. Mentored Colin Limpus, who's again a veteran today. He came out for a crocodile survey and discovered Gahirmata in 1974. The other rookery was discovered by a Forest Department research officer, Chandrasekhar Kar, seen in this picture in the 80s, and Bivash Pandav, a wildlife biology student of the Wildlife Institute of India in the early 90s. Now, the story of the Ridleys is that they're globally distributed and amongst the most abundant turtles. But for a long time, people didn't know whether, how Ridleys, olive Ridleys and Kemp's Ridleys had evolved. I will tell a little science story here because it involves some research that we did. One of my first postdoctoral projects was to use genetics to study sea turtles. And the remarkable thing was that what we had not been able to find out using conventional methods, people didn't, for example, know whether turtles really came back to the beaches they were born in this business, because they went away as like tiny little hatchlings and came back as these big adults. And what kind of tag can you put on a turtle that will stay for so long? And only 1 in 1,000 maybe survives to adulthood. But in the late 90s, they discovered using genetics that you could actually trace populations. And so you could demonstrate that turtles actually did come back to the same beaches where they were born. Now, this could also be used to trace evolutionary history. And what we found using the data that we collected from Orissa was that we postulated that the climatic changes that had affected the Earth had actually started before the Isthmus of Panama joined North and South America, which split up the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. And so the changes actually began because the ocean circulation patterns changed completely. In that time, the North Indian and North Atlantic and Indian Ocean became warmer, and these, it turns out, are the two places that Ridley turtles survived. The one in the Northern Atlantic became the Kemp's Ridley, and the one in the Southern the Indian Ocean then recolonized the Atlantic and Pacific, and is the widely known Oliver Ridley that we know today. And it's a fairly cool story because a lot of that comes out of the research that we did in India, which actually found that the Ridleys we find here are the oldest of the Ridleys in the world. We also conducted later satellite tracking studies that showed that a lot of them spend their off seasons in the non-nesting seasons in the Bay of Bengal, while some proportion of them do migrate to Sri Lanka to feed. As Rahul mentioned, though 20 years ago there was considerable hand-wringing about the imminent decline or extinction of these turtles, but in the last 12 years that we've been monitoring them, they have been steadily increasing at Rushikulya, and arribadas have also, arribada is the Spanish name for arrival, which is used for these mass nesting events. Arribadas have also increased in Gahir Mata. On this particular 2013, I think we counted close to 60,000 turtles, and over the years we've those aren't hatchlings; those are actually adults. Over the last 10 years, I think the largest arribada that we've recorded in Rushikulya is about 350 to 400,000 turtles. That's a lot of turtles. So that looks great, right? But if we trace the history back about 40 years, in the late 70s and 80s, after the introduction of mechanization to India, turtles were already being taken by fishing boats that came in from West Bengal and fished them for the meat markets of Calcutta. People who grew up in Calcutta in the 50s and the 60s remember seeing freshwater turtles and sea turtles in their markets all the time. And this was fine. There was, I don't believe much harm was done to the population then. But by the 70s, when the government introduced trawling, they started using motorized vessels to go out fishing, and many people counted that every year 50,000 to 80,000 turtles were landed and shipped to Calcutta. They were taken by truck and by train and so on, and this was legal. Now, in 1977, all of the turtles were included on the Indian Wildlife Protection Act, and it became illegal, but enforcement was very weak. A young herpetologist, another person who joined the Madras Crocodile Bank and was inspired by Rom, went out and did a survey, took these photographs. Her article was published. She wrote articles. An article by a Times of India reporter, an India Today reporter, was published with her pictures, and this came to the notice of Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, who asked for enforcement by the Forest Guard. There's a lovely story there. She has a little clipping on which she makes a little note and sends to the Environment Secretary, Mr. Samar Singh, who I interviewed as part of my book. And Samar Singh remembers being asked by the Prime Minister to get the Coast Guard involved in protecting turtles. Now, the Coast Guard was part of the Ministry of Defense, and he went to the Ministry of Defense, and his counterpart over there looked at him and said, "Turtle, what the hell is a turtle, and why should we be involved in protecting it?" Of course, when the minister realized that that the request was coming from the Prime Minister herself, the Coast Guard was mobilized. And the note, as Samar Singh remembers, Indira Gandhi had written in her, had written a little note by the side saying, "Who is keeping an eagle eye on this issue?" And thus sort of started a centralized movement to enforce wildlife conservation in general, but sea turtles in particular. Vijaya died tragically a few years later, but she is immortalized by the name of the species that she studied, the forest cane turtle, which was renamed Vijayachelis sylvatica after her some years later. So this enforcement of the Wildlife Act led to the decline in intentional take of turtles. But in the 90s, another problem was introduced. Thousands of turtles were captured in trawl fishing and died, and they die of asphyxiation because they kept underwater for too long and eventually drown. I won't dwell on that for too long, but over the years, especially in the early 2000s, there was a considerable conflict between conservationists and fishers. Fishers felt that conservationists were attacking them all the time. Conservationists felt that not enough was being done by the enforcement agencies. Since about the mid-2000s, we've been working with various platforms, including one called the Orissa Marine Resources Conservation Consortium, to bring fishers, conservationists together and attempt to solve fishery-related mortality, reduction of bycatch, and so on. But at the same time, we're also dealing with a whole host of other issues, such as coastal development, development of ports, and all other forms of interference that may have longer-term effects. One of the differences is that even if you kill, nobody wants 10,000 turtles killed for no good reason, right? They all wash up on shore and rot. There might be value if there was a sustainable use program for them, as there is in some parts of the world, but there isn't in India. But even if 10,000 turtles are to die, which they did for many, many years, every year 10,000 turtles died. But clearly these populations are able to recover from that because there are still beaches for them to come out and nest on. So as a biologist, even though the sight of 10,000, 1,000 dead turtles on a beach looks much more shocking and sad, it probably isn't as much of a threat to the population as something like habitat loss is. Once the nesting beach goes, thanks to a port or due to climate change or to some other form of development, those beaches are lost forever and those populations have possibly been permanently impacted. Now, fortunately, that's kind of a scary thought. But over the years, over the last several decades, there's also been a great passion for sea turtle conservation around India. Turtle conservation and tiger conservation started almost in the same year, and almost in the same decade at the same time. Around the time that Bustard had recorded the mass nesting beach and initiated a research and conservation program, Ram Whitaker and others had started sea turtle monitoring in Tamil Nadu. And I mentioned this when I talked about Satish Bhaskar. They started these turtle walks, conducted surveys of a sea turtle fishery in Tuticorin, and when basically it was a bunch of friends going out onto the beach. Their first hatchery was in a friend's backyard. It was subsequently run by the Madras Snake Park Trust, and for a while, for a few years in between, by government departments such as CMFRI and the Forest Department. In 1988, when I was, I think, in my third year of my bachelor's in zoology, there I've given away my age, in Madras Christian College, a group of turtle walk enthusiasts convinced me to go on a turtle walk with them for the first time, and I saw my first olive ridley turtle, and it was, perhaps up to that point, one of the most moving experiences that I had, because there was this creature that spent its entire life out at sea, and there was no way that you could watch it or see it or observe it in its natural element, unlike all of the other animals that you could normally go out to a forest or even a zoo and see. And it came ashore, and we were out, we were youngsters, teenagers walking on the beach at night, and all of a sudden we saw a track, and We'd seen many tracks before, and we'd walked up the tracks, and the turtle would have finished nesting and gone back, and be like, oh, damn it, we missed another turtle. And then finally, after months of seeing these tracks, we walked, and there was just one track, which meant that the turtle was still on the beach. And we crawled up behind her, and there was this prehistoric creature sitting there, and you could sit right up next to her, dig a little hole, feel the eggs fall in your hand. And it was really quite a, I think, an experience that, changed my life. Clearly, still talking about turtles 30 years later. And the students group that we started then, which we thought, a bunch of us, we started it, and we assumed that once we finished our, degrees and moved on, that the group would wind down. But it passed from generation to generation of students and has been active for actually over 30 years now. But this movement and similar experiences with turtles around the country led to movements, little programs everywhere. A group of fishermen read an article about turtles in the Hindu, no less, and started their own little program in a fishing village in Kerala. There are school teachers in many places, activists, animal welfare groups that have tried to combine turtles and tourism, fishing youth, and community groups in Orissa that actually, many of them were field staff of research projects that were started by many generations of field biologists and conservationists, who then went on to start their own little conservation programs. So every state in India has a turtle conservation group. And if one broadens that out, every country in the world that has that is in the tropics has a turtle nesting somewhere on it, and has an associated sea turtle conservation program. So there are probably sea turtle beaches and conservation programs in 80 plus countries around the world, which makes them in a sense more ubiquitous than tigers or pandas or whales or any other iconic species. That's a map of the Turtle Conservation Group, a little network that we started some years ago so that people could interact and learn from each other. In closing, what I'd like to say is that sea turtles are really iconic. They're really charismatic. Every person that's come into contact with an adult turtle has had the same kind of life-changing experience that I did. Well, maybe almost every person, or has been shown a hatchling and has picked up a hatchling in their hands, gone out and released it. Sea turtle hatchlings are just amongst the most incredibly cute creatures. You might arrive at the conclusion that adult leatherbacks are ugly, but no sea turtle hatchling can be anything other than, irresistibly charming and cute. And so people get really sentimental about and attached to these animals, including people, perhaps especially people who work with them for many, many years. And that largely is a good thing. But there is also a tendency to become too attached to them as individual species. Really what the larger picture is that they are flagships, they're umbrellas for these ecosystems that they live in. For coral reefs, for seagrass meadows, which are the feeding habitat for green turtles, for these open pelagic zones, for the migratory paths that they take. Sea turtles are really a representation. They're icons, or they're like ambassadors for marine and oceanic and coastal conservation. What would sea turtles do if there were no nesting beaches, right? So I like to point out at the end that as much as we can be fascinated by and obsessed with sea turtles, we shouldn't forget the fact that there's a larger world that they live in, and it is that the sustainability of that world that should be our primary consideration. I've often got into, this might open the topic for debate. In the sea turtle world recently, there has been debate about when, that sea turtles were a part of the food of many cultures around the world. And for the last 40 years, the campaign from sea turtle conservationists worldwide is that should stop. And the narrative was it was because sea turtles were endangered. But so many sea turtle populations have recovered, so many are increasing, that people have started to ask, when is a regulated or a subsistence use culture of sea turtles possible again? If we can eat fish, why can't we eat sea turtles? As a conservationist and as a biologist, my answer to that is, if we stop, focusing on the turtle and focus on the ecosystem as a whole, that gives us the answer to that question, which is that all forms of human interaction are legitimate as long as we're able to maintain the health of populations and ecosystems, and all of the wonderful creatures that they share these ecosystems with. With that, I think I'm done. Yes, thank you. And I'm going to leave a slide with some of my books for children as well as big people. And I'd be happy to take questions. So, Rahul, I've got a bunch of questions over here already. Should I just start by answering those?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
And my other question is that all of the questions are going to come to me on the Q&A, right?
I can't hear what.
Yeah, all the questions will be asked on the Q&A window itself, and each time you answer them, you can just say answering live and start answering them one by one.
Sure. All right. The first question is the supposed weakening of the Earth's magnetic field having a visible effect on turtle migration, navigation? Did the leatherbacks heading to Australia maybe get lost and end up in Madagascar and Mozambique? We probably don't know. These studies are really hard, and most of the studies on the magnetic field have been done in the lab. But with regard to whether they got lost, I think it's extremely unlikely. What happens to these hatchlings is that what happens to turtles is that as hatchlings, they enter different oceanic gyres, and so two hatchlings from the same beach could accidentally end up in two ocean circulation systems. So that example about leatherbacks from Papua and Papua New Guinea, for example, from Indonesia and Papua New Guinea, they're just a few hundred kilometers apart, but they enter, as hatchlings, they just enter different ocean current systems and then circulate in those systems till they become adults and find feeding grounds that are part of that part of the ocean. And so then they're coming back to the same nesting ground to nest. So when they go back to feed, they're going to go back to the places that they already knew, which is what probably happened out of Andamans. They probably get swept out into the southern Indian Ocean and get swept west towards Africa as through a different current system, or east towards Australia in a different current system. What's the evolutionary cause for gender determination by temperature? What challenges does it pose for conservation? This is a great question. Environmental sex determination, which could be temperature and other factors, is actually it actually offers a lot of flexibility. There's a whole evolutionary literature on optimal sex ratios and why most of the time sex ratio is 50-50%, and there are sort of like these really exceptional instances where it's not, and I'm not sort of going to go into the evolutionary biology of that. However, the difference is that if you have environmental sex determination, you actually you can bias the sex ratio by your behavior. You can bias it towards females by nesting on warmer beaches or in a warmer part of the season. All right, so it's that flexibility that it affords that potentially provides evolutionary value. For conservationists, it is a challenge because the beaches are getting warmer. The short-term good news is that it's better to have more females than males. For a number of obvious reasons that I won't go into here, perhaps, but in the animal kingdom, it only takes one male. In any system, it only takes one male to fertilize many females, and so females are really always the limiting factor for population growth. So it's always better to have more females than males, but rising temperatures also means that the incubation temperature can become lethal, leading to reduced hatching success and basically the mortality of hatchlings. So that is an issue. And of course, very, very skewed sex ratios can lead to loss of genetic diversity, and this can be a huge, problem for the health of populations. Is there a particular reason that the beaches of Orissa attract large congregations of turtles versus other nesting beaches? We don't actually know that. We're actually attempting to, we're conducting a global study of nesting beaches right now. This will involve some analysis of the environmental parameters. Ask me that question a year from now. There's a good chance that I would say I still don't know, but we're actually hoping that analysis will give us some answers. Anecdotally, we know that Ridleys like to nest near river mouths, and the coast of Orissa is known for the northern part of Andhra, and Orissa is known for a large number of these river mouths, large outflow of fresh water, and perhaps that is a cue of some sort. What are the main dive sites around India where divers can see these turtles while diving? The divers can probably answer that question better, but certainly Lakshadweep and certainly the Andamans. The Lakshadweep actually is a great place to see green turtles. There are large foraging populations of green turtles, so there are some islands that you'll even see them while snorkeling, and you can follow them around. They're great to watch. But the main dive sites in the Andamans and Havelock and Neil, and there are fairly frequent sightings of hawksbill and green turtles in the water. Do turtles show parental care? The very short answer to that is no. This is a particular strategy of reproduction where you lay a large number of eggs and some small proportion of them survive, not dissimilar to mosquitoes. Each turtle lays, like I said, 100, 150 eggs, and every turtle nests between 2 to 6 to 8 times in a season. Small turtles like Ridleys will nest 2 or 3 times in a season, but larger turtles like green turtles nest 6 to 8 times in a season. So they're laying 1,000 eggs in a season, and they can reproduce for 10 to 15 to 20 seasons or longer. So in a lifetime, a turtle will put down, maybe 20,000 eggs. So even a fraction of them are surviving. They will leave behind more, put more offspring than replacement. Understanding the long history of turtles on the planet, is it safe to assume that they will survive this climate change as well? I hope so. There was a theory which subsequently biologists don't believe it anymore, but one of the most elegant theories about the extinction of dinosaurs was that the meteor events led to a change in temperatures, and dinosaurs, like other reptiles, must have had temperature sex determination, and maybe they all got masculinized. You can have these images of like male dinosaurs walking around looking for mates and not finding any. A new theme of Jurassic Park 5, perhaps, but. The pace of change today is much, much more rapid than ever before. And so I think it is safe to be concerned. I think it's cautious. We must be cautious, and we must be concerned about the potential impacts of global warming, of the warming of nesting beaches on the health of populations. That is something we must be concerned about. At the same time, like I said, a lot of sea turtle conservation actions promoted by NGOs are very short-term and knee-jerk. And while populations are stable or increasing, I think we do need to think about health of ecosystems as a whole. We do need to remember that, like elephants, like some turtles, like green turtles, actually can have more negative impacts on ecosystems than if they increase in number than if they decrease in number. Okay, I've been seeing that question for a while. What's the difference between turtles and tortoises? There are tortoises are one single family of all turtles and tortoises. So all turtles are tortoises, but all tortoises are not turtles. So the group turtles and tortoises comprise about, I've forgotten, somewhere between 12 and 17 families. One family is tortoises, which are all the land-dwelling turtles are all tortoises. They don't have flippers. They have kind of legs, and they have more domed carapaces, domed shells. Turtles are aquatic. The non-land turtles are aquatic, freshwater and marine. 2 marine families, and all the rest are freshwater. There are, I think, about 10 plus freshwater families, and typically they're all like, for streamlining, they have flat shells and they have flippers and so on. All right. I'm going to take some of the biology questions and then come back to the conservation ones later. So, turtles do. How do turtles sense the magnetic field? They have sensors in their head like birds, and basically these are believed. This is obviously ion-based, and these sensors enable them to detect the magnetic field, and this is known from a wide variety of animals. Are they monogamous? Absolutely not. All sea turtle species are. So in animal behavior, you have monogamy, and then you have polygamy and polyandry, which is one male, many females, one males, and then where everybody mates with each other, it's called promiscuous behavior. All sea turtles are promiscuous, and their mating ritual is to pretty much, mount every female that they see. Green turtles are known to be particularly forward, and there are pictures. I mean, if you actually Google the net, you'll find pictures of green turtles. The fabulous pictures from Hawaii and elsewhere, where you have like 3 green turtles, males hanging on to a single female. We've seen this occasionally in Orissa as well, with more than one male trying to mount a single female. So I think that courtship etiquette is not one of the defining features of sea turtles. What conditions do female turtles need for a perfect nesting site? Pretty much like they nest in tropical sandy beaches around the world. Some of these beaches are less than a few meters wide. Some turtles prefer big sandy beaches like leatherbacks and olive ridleys, with nice offshore approaches. And other species like green turtles and hawksbills will nest near coral reefs, and you come ashore, between rocks as well. But ultimately, they need a sandy beach in which they can dig a nice nest where those eggs can incubate, and that don't get flooded, because if they do, then the eggs will die. All right. Are there volunteer programs for sea turtles close to the Mumbai coast? There aren't too many sea turtle nesting beaches near the Mumbai coast, despite the report of one turtle that did come up and nest a couple of years back. And there are volunteer programs. There are programs in southern Maharashtra, though. However, there is a group called the Marine Life of Mumbai, I think, and they might have more information about this. I would recommend, Hussain, that you look up the Marine Life of Mumbai and find out. There is increasing interest in marine turtles around the world, around the country, and so perhaps there are small marine turtle related programs there as well now. There's protected hatching sites where the forest guards take them to the sea after they've hatched. I've heard them taking it to the water rather than letting them find the sea themselves. Can this affect their ability to find their way back to their birth beach later? The answer is we don't actually know. For a long time, sea turtle biologists have said that imprinting took place during the period that they walked to the water. We're not very sure that this is actually true. However, to be on the safe side, I think conservation programs around the world and best practices for hatcheries, even the manuals that we have produced, we recommend that hatchlings are released on the beach, close to the water, and then monitored, till they reach the water and enter it. Monitor them so that, because otherwise, they're going to be picked up by crows and dogs, and it's kind of like a little sad after all of that effort, keeping them in the hatchery for a couple of months. But the other thing that we recommend, there are other best practice recommendations that you don't release them in the same place every day. So in fact, I think that's even more dangerous because fish are quite smart and they will learn very, very quickly that there is a spot where somebody comes and feeds them with these really yummy, crunchy hatchlings. So amongst best practices, as perhaps as important as releasing them on land is to actually like release them at different spots along the beach. If climate change can lead to an increase in females, can that also lead to growing populations, as in females? Absolutely. And yes, if yes, at what point does a decline in male hatchlings become a limiting factor? This relates to the point that I made earlier about very skewed sex ratios having potential impacts on genetic diversity. But we have very little idea of the timescales in which this can happen. From broad theory of population and evolutionary genetics, and from models, we know that there can be these declines, but these are long-lived species. So it also means that it takes a very, very long time for these effects to appear. It takes a reason we monitor them for decades is also because it takes a long time to detect declines and it takes a long time to detect increases as well. So when I say that we're seeing a stable or increasing population, I say it with caution. In the early 2000s, we thought the population was declining, but it wasn't. We think it's increasing now, but maybe it's not. So again, it's very, very difficult to answer that question with a precise answer, other than to say that it is something that we must bear in mind while while on one hand acknowledging that more females could certainly lead to short-term increases in population size. Hello, Simant. Good to see you again too. There seem to be stories about turtle tombs where old turtles will eventually head to give up their lives, enlightened souls. Is there any truth to this? Is it just a mystical myth? Let me answer that with a mystical myth of my own. A white man or a white woman meets this old sadhu and says, old wise man, I believe that the world rests on the back of an elephant. And he says, yes, it does. And she says, and the elephant rests on the back of a turtle. And he says, yes, it does. And so the old white woman, let's say, says, but old white man, what does the turtle rest on? And he says, madam, it is turtles all the way down. So,
I'm sorry, I'm just unmuting myself for a tiny second there because that sounds awfully like Terry Pratchett.
I think it's a Terry Pratchett. It's my Terry Pratchett voice. It's a very old story. Yeah.
The great Attune.
Yeah. Right. Vignesh wants to know if they show bacopharyngeal respiration. By that, do you mean? Is there? They're basically air-breathing vertebrates. They breathe through lungs like all reptiles and birds and mammals. Birds are basically slightly fancy flying reptiles, and do not have any capacity to breathe in any other way, which is why they die if submerged for too long. What they do have is a remarkable capacity to lower their metabolism and to accumulate the byproducts of anaerobic respiration, which you will recognize when you've held your breath for too long or when you go for a run, and lactic acid builds up in your muscles. And there's a point at which, and our tolerance for that is very, very small, but turtles have a much, much higher capacity for that and are therefore able to stay underwater for, when they're resting for hours. But what essentially happens in trawl nets is, or any kinds of nets, is that they struggle, and the struggle to escape, they essentially use up all of their resources and eventually succumb. But also the other point over there is that they often go into a comatose state, and so when they pulled out of the nets, they're often they actually haven't, they're not dead, and sometimes can be revived, and there are protocols for doing that, which conservationists have been successful in persuading fishers to do in some parts of the world, not in India. What are the benefits of hibernation? I believe they don't have long hibernation cycles as compared to mammals. Yeah, very little is known actually. In fact, one is not even sure if they actually did hibernate. It's just a matter of they're staying perhaps underwater for longer rest periods. And the benefits of it is, like in mammals, to overcome unsuitable environmental conditions, typically too much cold. What's the average life of sea turtles? Again, for a species that spends most of its life at sea, very little is known, but believed to be about 30 to 50 years for most species, and maybe 50 years plus for green turtles. Are any sea turtle species critically endangered? Many species were listed as critically endangered over the years, mostly because of exploitation through the early part of the 20th century. So when these assessments came into effect in the 70s, and through till recently, I think the hawksbill turtle is still listed as critically endangered. The leatherback was listed as critically endangered till a few years ago. Green turtles were listed as endangered and critically endangered at various points. Kemp's Ridleys, I think, are still listed as critically endangered because they're only found in one spot, which is there's one nesting beach in Mexico, and their numbers had dropped to a few thousands in the 70s and have bounced back a little bit, but are still not at a number that is considered stable. So several turtle species have been listed as endangered at various points in time. Many, as I said, are stable or increasing, but the fact that they're increasing or are no longer listed as endangered does not mean that there are not conservation concerns about them. What's the evolutionary story about tortoises that live on islands like in the Galapagos? I'm not going to answer that question over here because, as I said, like tortoises are evolutionarily quite unrelated to sea turtles and different in many ways. But I am going to say that like the evolution of animals on islands is itself absolutely fascinating, because islands are isolated and species diverge and diversify and become different from each other. And the Galapagos is best known for Darwin's study of the Galapagos finches, which all like are related, but each island had these different finches. And so that's a fascinating study by itself. And the Galapagos turtles are similar, and they're found in a couple of islands in the Galapagos and one island in the Indian Ocean, the Aldabra, which is another fascinating part of that story. Do adult turtles have natural predators? Thanks for your comments, Hussein. Yes, mostly sharks. In the case of leatherback turtles, probably like really large sharks and maybe killer whales. For those of you who have a morbid fascination for this sort of detail, there used to be a video online that did the rounds. I'm not sure if it's accessible anymore, that showed two orcas in the Southern Pacific playing with their food. Basically, they were sort of like knocking a leatherback turtle around in the water. And it is an amazing video in a sense, though you feel sad for the leatherback. Nevertheless, it's a 600 kilo animal that these two orcas are just like tossing around like it was a, like a little rag doll. What's the protocol for saving comatose turtles? It's pretty straightforward, actually. It's if it's on the boat, you put them with their body slightly elevated so that any water might come out, and keep them in a cool place and externally hydrated. for maybe half an hour to an hour, which is about the time that it takes for them to recover. I think roughly that. And at the end of that period, if they haven't recovered, it's unlikely that they will. What's the procedure for tagging? We usually put these little metal clips that have a little number on them, which is, people that have asked me whether it sort of bothers them, I kind of say, yeah, about the same as maybe, having your ear pierced. And to show solidarity, I've had my ears pierced, so can't argue with that. But the procedure for satellite putting satellite and how we know, what we learn from tags is that when they basically come back to nest, you read the tag again and you're like, oh, this is the same turtle. Or somebody else catches the turtle somewhere else, they're like, oh, this turtle came from such and such a place. But if you want to track them, we put these satellite transmitters, which you have to, for hard-shell turtles, we paste them on the back using an epoxy, and then it sends these signals to a transmitter and we get that data. For soft-shell turtles like leatherbacks, it's actually pretty cool. You can surgically actually drill a couple of holes in the ridge on the carapace and tie the transmitter through that. Can we use artificial lights to bring up new nesting grounds? How can we minimize effects of artificial lights from straying? Some of the best work has been, this is one of the simplest conservation problems to solve. There's a load of work, primarily from Florida, but also from Australia, on turtle-friendly lighting. For years, I've been trying to get NGOs in India to sort of take up turtle-friendly lighting as a campaign, and I've kind of failed. So there are people here that want to, groups that want to take that on as a cause. That's actually potentially low-hanging fruit. It's basically shading the light so that they don't have a wide radius of influence. The color of the light, the sort of the field of the light, the direction of the light, and so on. So there's plenty of ways to minimize the impact of light. I'd be very, I'd be skeptical about creating new beaches, because one is that these beaches have been selected by the turtles for a reason. Secondly, the lights aren't actually attracting the adults. The adults, if anything, are reacting negatively to the lights. And if there are a lot of lights, they may not come to those beaches to nest. It's the hatchlings that get attracted by the lights and therefore end up on land, on roads, getting run over by cars. There was a photograph I showed of an adult surrounded by hatchlings. I was wondering, considering the time they take to hatch, was the story behind it? Great question. I'm so glad you asked that, Samar. So obviously, they take 2 months to hatch. So this is not, the adult with her own hatchlings. In Orissa, when there is a mass hatching event, as you can imagine, if 100,000 turtles have nested over a few days, you're going to get 10 million hatchlings, right? So you go around that beach, every place you put your foot down, your foot sinks in the sand because, there's a nest over there and the hatchlings coming out, and the beach is just covered over with hatchlings. And occasionally there's a second arribada, and the turtles come ashore when these hatchlings are, when the first wave of the hatchlings from the first arribada are going out. So in Orissa in 1993, there was actually a second, it could just be a single turtle, but on that particular occasion, there was a second arribada. One of the youngsters that was inspired by Ram to a career in wildlife ecology, Shekhar Dattatri, was and who went on to become a very well-known wildlife photographer, was on the beach along with Belinda Wright, another wildlife photographer conservationist, and they got these pictures of turtles coming ashore, the second arribada, and hatchlings going out from the first arribada. There's actually a picture that I didn't show, which Belinda took, of Shekhar sitting with his camera, with surrounded with an adult turtle coming ashore and hatchlings going out to sea. Is it possible to study the behavior of sea turtles? Absolutely. There's a massive body of literature out there now. A lot of it is not observational, except that on nesting beaches. But there's even been in-water observational studies in the last few years. But a lot of it is using indirect techniques such as genetics, chemical analyses, as I showed you, satellite telemetry and so on. So there are many, many ways to study sea turtles now, and yeah, sea turtle behavior is a very, very broad field of study around the world. What's the difference between carapace of loggerheads and loggerheads are hard-shell turtles. The leatherbacks are the ones that are soft shells, and they basically have it's cartilage, and so they have a cartilaginous carapace. Whereas hard-shell turtles have a keratinized carapace, which is essentially keratin is the same as your nails, and so the scutes on the back of a hard-shell turtles are keratin. Is there still a population of hawksbill turtles that hibernates? Well, those were loggerheads I was talking about, but no, there's nothing known about that at this time. There's a good question here about diseases, and turtles do get a number of diseases. One of the ones that it was very widespread and it was causing concern in a number of places is a disease called fibropapilloma, which is caused by a virus. Not much was known about it, but it was at one point it was associated with pollution, and you know we're not too sure about what causes it, but it was very widespread in some populations around the world. But they do get a number of other diseases as well, and in fact, quite a bit is known from rescue centers, which many people maintain around the world. So when turtles get caught in nets or in plastic bags, or in get to have their sort of carapaces or flippers broken or cut by boats, they get rescued and brought to these rescue centers where they're sort of rehabilitated and often released into the wild. And so under those situations, there have been some studies of their diseases as well, of veterinary care, let me say. Is forced copulation common in turtles? Yeah, like I said, males are pretty insistent. Do we know anything about the cues that are responsible for initiating the offshore mating aggregations that occur annually? Well, different populations seem to migrate at different times of the year in response to environmental conditions. So in some parts of the world, they migrate in winter, in other during the rainy season, in others during the summer. So I think it depends really on the temperature of incubation that they're looking for. And so the migration per se, is tied in with that. We're also asking questions with regard to, when does this arribada occur? So in Costa Rica and in India, wherever these arribadas occur, nobody quite knows what day they're going to start. So if you ask me today, I'll say, yeah, sometime in February, March, maybe during the third quarter or the first quarter of the moon, and like vague stuff like that. And that's because we haven't really we haven't been able to pin down what are these triggers for, that, because when you think about it, they're offshore for 2-3 months, and then suddenly on one day, like 10,000 of them decide to all come ashore together. So there must be some sort of trigger, environmental trigger, or maybe even something, a pheromone or a hormone that cues them all to come ashore. We're still searching for that answer. Do juvenile and adult turtles interact at sea? Not except by accident, to the best of our knowledge. Have scientists tried providing optimum temperature in labs for the conservation of turtles? I'm not quite sure how to answer that question, in the sense that, like, we do know what the optimum temperature for getting a 50-50% sex ratio is, but you can only do that for so many nests. There's a funny story there. Before, actually, the Kemp's Ridley was known to be endangered in the 60s, before scientists discovered temperature sex determination. And so they brought them back. So what they did was the Americans got very concerned about it, and they got very excited, and they flew down in these choppers, took thousands of eggs in these little styrofoam boxes, flew them back to Texas, incubated them and released them. And then about 5-10 years later, after they started this program, temperature sex determination was discovered, and they realized that they'd been releasing male hatchlings for all of that time. So we know better than to do that now, but when it comes to protecting hundreds of thousands of nests or adult populations, there's only so much that you can do with an active management intervention. Two questions here about nesting. How does rain affect incubation? It changes the temperature, and it can flood nests, which is rarely known to happen, but it doesn't seem to affect the nest, the success too much. But the combination of moisture and temperature is now believed to affect sex ratios, and so to some degree that is how rain can affect it, and which is why turtles nest in different seasons, because they're looking for that optimum temperature. And they prefer sandy beaches because they need to be able to dig that big hole to drop their eggs in, and a little harder to do on rocky shores, I imagine. I think I'm on the last question, which is great, which is there's some work about the gene switch of turtles have for cancer cells. Any idea about it? I'm so happy at this point to say, Seema, that's a really good question. I have no idea at all. So with my profession, with my admission of ignorance on that one, I'm going to end this Q&A. That was lovely. Thank you for asking all of those questions. It was thoroughly enjoyable interacting with all of you, and that was great.
Kartik, I just want to say this was one of the best presentations and talks we have had. I mean, you kept us engaged right from the moment go, right up to the last question, the way you answered it. It's been an amazing webinar for all of us. And even as organizers, I have listened to every slide and every word that you had to say because you held our attention for so long. That was amazing. I have nothing else to say. Thank you so much for doing this. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to do this for us. What we will be doing is a lot of the things that you have put up as references. Mariam will get in touch with you again. We'll put it all on a slide and an email and send it out to all the participants so that they all have some reference point to either one, get in touch with you, or two, look at the references that you gave regarding the books as well as your own novels, which I hope to get one of them soon and start reading them. So thank you so much for doing this. Big thank you to the audience for asking so many wonderful questions. They were really interesting. And this has been a great evening. It's been a great Saturday evening for all of us.
Thank you, Siddharth. Thank you, Mariam and Rahul, for inviting me in the first place. Thanks, SSI team. It was great doing this talk. Thank you.